She had been rehearsing this meeting for 11 years. Not consciously, not every day, but somewhere underneath the preparation for every important meeting she had ever walked into. The pitches, the negotiations, the board presentations. There had always been a quieter rehearsal running. The one where she walked into a room and he was already there and she said something that was not "I never stopped thinking about you," because that was true and she was never going to say it. She had prepared a great many things to say instead. She had not prepared for him to look up from his phone and go completely still. She had not prepared for 11 years to collapse into nothing in the time it took him to say her name. Welcome to Visa's Tales. If you are new here, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel, so you never miss a story. Now sit back, relax, and let's get into it. There is a particular kind of city that never sleeps but also never quite wakes up. It runs on ambition and caffeine and the specific energy of people who have decided that what they want is worth whatever it costs. And it produces, in the people who live there long enough, a kind of brightness that is also a kind of exhaustion. The city does not ask what you came from. It only asks what you are building. Nadia Cole had been building for 11 years. She was 31 years old. She ran the West Africa division of Meridian Group, one of the largest infrastructure investment firms on the continent, from an office on the 14th floor of a building that she had chosen specifically because it had floor-to-ceiling windows, and on clear mornings you could see the coast from her desk. She had not grown up with floor-to-ceiling windows. She had grown up in a two-room flat above her mother's tailoring shop in the old part of the city, where the windows were small and the light came in sideways and the smell of fabric and thread had been so constant that she still, occasionally, caught that smell in unexpected places and felt 12 years old again. She had 2 degrees, one management consulting scar that had nearly broken her at 25, and a reputation for reading a room faster than anyone else in it. She was known in her industry for 3 things. She finished what she started, she did not take meetings she did not need, and she never showed anyone exactly how much she wanted something. Her assistant, a precise young man named Felix who had been with her for 2 years and had learned very quickly that she meant what she said and said exactly what she meant, knocked on the glass of her office door at 9:45 on a Thursday morning. She looked up. The Anchor Holdings team is here. Conference Room B. She saved what she was working on. She picked up her notepad. She still took handwritten notes, a habit from her consulting years she had never shaken. She stood. How many? 3. Their CEO, their finance director, and a new partner they brought in. Felix paused. The partner is not on the brief I was sent. Who briefed you on the partner? I had a colleague at Anchor check the list this morning. The partner was added late. His name is... She was already moving toward the door. I will find out who he is when I meet him. That is what the meeting is for. Felix stepped back. She walked down the corridor toward Conference Room B. She had not thought about him in weeks. That was not entirely true. She had not let herself think about him in weeks, which was a different thing, and the difference was the kind she had become expert at managing. She had been 19 years old the last time she had seen him. She had built 11 years on the far side of 19. Before all of that, before the conference table she was about to sit at and the handshake she was about to perform, there had been 2 years. They had been 17 when his family moved to the old part of the city. His father had taken a position at the regional office of a trading company, and they had moved into the large house on the corner of the street where her mother's tailoring shop was. She had noticed him the way you notice people who are new to a place and therefore slightly more visible than the people who have always been there. He was tall and quiet and did not perform his strangeness the way some new people did. He simply arrived and paid attention. They had been in the same literature class at school. He had sat 2 rows behind her and she had been aware of this in the particular way you are aware of someone before you have spoken to them. A peripheral attention, the kind that does not announce itself. He had spoken to her first, one afternoon in the school library, over a book they had both reached for at the same moment. The book was about architecture. She had been reading about it because she was interested in everything. He had been reading about it because his mother wanted him to consider becoming an architect. Do you actually want to be an architect? She had asked it directly. I do not know yet. That is honest. Are you always this direct? Only about things that matter. That had been the beginning. 2 years of the beginning. walking to school in the same direction and then walking home from school in the same direction and then sitting on the low wall outside her mother's shop on warm evenings talking about everything and nothing, the way you talk at 17 and 18 when you have not yet learned to ration what you say. Through all of it, until she was 19 and his mother ended it with a cup of tea and a smile and the word but. He had told her about his family's expectations, his father's idea of what a career should look like, his mother's very specific idea of what a future should contain. She had told him about the two-room flat and the smell of fabric and what she wanted to make of herself, which was considerable and which she had never told anyone in quite that much detail because ambition in a girl from the market was sometimes received as comedy, and she had learned to be careful about where she put it. He had not found it comedy. He had found it the most interesting thing he had ever heard. She had been 19 when she understood what his family's expectations meant in practice. He had tried to reach her. 2 calls to a number she had changed. A letter to an address she had moved from. She had known he tried. She had been 19 and the wound had been precise and deep, and she had told herself the trying was not enough. That a person who loved you would have tried harder. That she was worth harder. She had believed that then. She was 31 now and she understood things she had not understood at 19. That sometimes people do not know the thing they need to know in order to try harder, and that the absence of knowledge is not the same as the absence of intention. She had been working on the Anchor Holdings deal for 4 months. It was the largest single transaction her division had handled since she took over. A joint infrastructure development across 3 cities, the kind of deal that would define the division's trajectory for the next decade. She had spent 4 months reading every document, attending every preliminary call, building a team that knew the material as well as she did. She was ready. She pushed open the door of conference room B. 3 people stood as she entered. She looked at them in the practice sequence she always used, left to right, registering, cataloging. The CEO. A man in his 50s, silver at the temples, the particular ease of someone who had been in rooms like this his entire career. Gerald Anchor. She knew his name. She knew his company's founding story, his board composition, and his weakness for over-leveraged infrastructure plays, which was why he needed Meridian and why he was here. The finance director. A woman in her 40s, sharp suit, the expression of someone who had read the same briefing documents Nadia had and was quietly assessing whether Nadia had read them too. Nadia had read them. She noted the assessment and returned it. And then the third. She had been moving her gaze left to right. The third person was on the right. She looked at him. He was looking at his phone when she came in, and he looked up when she entered the room, and he went completely still. She went completely still. 11 years. He was taller than she remembered. The teenager she had known had been lean in the angular way of someone still growing into himself, and the man standing across the conference table from her had grown into himself fully, broad shoulders, the same jaw, the same eyes that she had spent more time thinking about than was probably reasonable for someone who prided herself on being a rational person. He was wearing a dark suit that fit him the way expensive things fit people who do not need to announce that they are expensive. His hair was close-cropped. There was a small scar on his chin that had not been there before, or perhaps it had been there and she had forgotten, or perhaps she had simply not let herself remember the details because remembering the details made the forgetting harder. His name was Daniel Ashford. The last time she had seen him, she had been 19 years old and crying on a roadside in the rain because his mother had just told her, in the specific language of people who are being cruel without raising their voice, that she was delightful, the word chosen carefully, warmly, with a smile, but Daniel Ashford. She was proud of her voice. It came out exactly the way she needed it to, warm, professional. The voice of someone encountering a pleasant surprise and not a decade of unresolved grief. Nadia. His voice was the same. Lower than it had been at 18, but the same. She had known it would be. She had told herself she had forgotten it, and she had known that was not true. She extended her hand across the table. He shook it. The handshake lasted exactly as long as it should have. She pulled back. She sat at the head of the table. She opened her notepad. "Shall we begin?" They began. The meeting ran 90 minutes. Nadia knew the material cold, and the material was complicated. Infrastructure financing across 3 jurisdictions, with a timeline that required simultaneous regulatory approval in 2 of them, and a capital structure that needed to be elegant enough to satisfy Anchor's equity partners while leaving Meridian room to protect its downside. It was the kind of deal that separated the people who understood finance from the people who merely thought they did. Daniel understood it. That was the first thing she noticed, underneath everything else she was trying not to notice. He spoke 3 times in the first 30 minutes, each time saying something that added specificity to what Gerald Anker had said in a general form. He had read the documents. He had read them carefully. He asked one question about the regulatory timeline in the 3rd jurisdiction that she had been waiting for someone to ask for 4 months, because it was the question that identified the real risk in the deal and most people had not seen it yet. She answered it directly. She watched him process the answer. She watched him understand it. She had always found it attractive when people were good at things. It had not occurred to her that this would still apply to him. At the 90-minute mark, Gerald Anker closed his folder and said, "I think this has been enormously productive." He looked at Nadia. "Your team is exactly what we need." She said, "Thank you. We will have a revised term sheet to you by end of next week." Gerald nodded. He and the finance director began gathering their things. There was the usual movement of a meeting ending, papers, phones, the small logistics of departure. Daniel did not immediately move. She looked at him. He looked at her. The room was still slightly occupied but beginning to empty. "Can I have 5 minutes?" She looked at the room. Gerald and the finance director were at the door, Felix appearing to escort them out. The room would be empty in 30 seconds. "I have another call at 11:30. "I know. 5 minutes." She looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded. Gerald and the finance director left. Felix closed the door. They were alone in conference room B for the first time in 11 years, and the silence had a specific weight. "I did not know you were going to be in this meeting. I run this division. I am in most significant meetings. I know that now." He looked at the table. "I did not know it when Gerald asked me to come in on this deal." She kept her eyes on her notepad. "How long have you been working with Anchor Holdings?" 8 months. "I came back from London 8 months ago." She looked up. "London. For years. Before that, Johannesburg. Before that, I was in the north for 2 years building the logistics company." She processed the geography of his last 11 years in the time it took him to say it. He had been moving. She had been moving. Neither of them had been standing still, and somehow they had ended up in the same room. "Congratulations on the partnership." "Thank you." A pause. "Congratulations on the division." She looked at her notepad again. She had written nothing in it since the meeting ended. She became aware of this and found it irritating. "This is going to be a significant deal," she said. 12 to 18 months of close collaboration between our teams. "I want to make sure we can work together professionally." He looked at her. She looked at the notepad. "Can I say something? You have 4 minutes left. I did not know what my mother said to you." He said it plainly, without decoration, the same way he had raised the regulatory timeline in the meeting. "I did not know for 2 years. When I found out, I tried to reach you. You had already left." She was very still. "I know you tried." He looked at her. "You knew? I received your calls." He was quiet for a moment. "And you did not answer." She looked at the conference table, white, long, the specific impersonal surface of a room designed for transactions. "I was 19. She paused. "I had just been told that the person I thought wanted a future with me had a mother who considered me unsuitable and had apparently allowed that to be the end of the conversation. I did not allow it. I did not know about the conversation. I know that now." She looked up at him. "I did not know it then." He held her gaze. "Are we going to be able to work together on this?" "Yes." She said it the way she said everything she meant. Directly, without qualification. "Are you sure? I have spent 11 years becoming someone who does not let what happened when she was 19 determine what she does when she is 31. She picked up her notepad. "So yes, I am sure." He looked at her for a long moment. "I am glad you are still here. In this city." She did not answer that. She stood. She picked up her pen. "My team will be in touch about the kickoff schedule." He stood. He picked up his briefcase. "Nadia." She looked at him. For what it is worth, she was wrong. "My mother. What she said to you." She paused. "She was wrong. I know." She walked out of conference room B. In the corridor, she exhaled once, short, controlled, and then she was already moving toward her next call. Felix appeared at her shoulder. "How did it go?" she said. "Well, send the anchor team the revised timeline for document exchange." Felix said, "Of course." "And the new partner, Daniel Ashford, his contact details?" She said, "Yes. Add him to the deal correspondence." She went back to her office. She sat at her desk. She looked out of the floor-to-ceiling windows at the city doing its morning work. The traffic, the buildings, the specific brightness of a coastal city in the late morning sun. She thought about 11 years and what you could build in them. She had built a great deal. She thought about the fact that the person who had, in some ways, started the building, the person whose absence had made her determined to become someone who could not be dismissed, was now sitting in a conference room 2 floors below her, about to spend the next 12 to 18 months working in close proximity to everything she had built. She thought about his voice saying her name. She opened her laptop and went back to work. The first 3 months of the deal were exactly what they should have been. Professional. Structured. The kind of collaboration that happened when 2 organizations with equally good people worked toward a shared goal. There were kickoff meetings and document reviews and site visits and regulatory consultations, and through all of it Nadia and Daniel operated with the specific efficiency of people who had decided, separately and without discussing it, that the work was the work and the work would be done correctly. They spoke in meetings. They corresponded by email. They occasionally passed in corridors or lobbies and said the things that people say in corridors and lobbies: quick operational updates, brief acknowledgments, the professional shorthand of people with busy schedules and shared objectives. They did not have another conversation like the one in conference room B. Nadia was aware of this. She suspected he was aware of it too. She was also aware, with the particular self-awareness of someone who had spent considerable energy understanding how her own mind worked, that she was not avoiding him. She was simply not creating opportunities for conversations that were not about the deal, because conversations that were not about the deal were not what she needed right now. The deal needed to close. Her division needed this to go well. And she had spent 11 years building something that she was not going to compromise because a man she had loved at 19 had walked back into her professional life and still had the same eyes. She told herself this several times in the first 3 months. It was not difficult to believe on the days when the work was demanding enough to fill all the available space, and the work was usually demanding enough. It was harder on the occasional Friday evenings when the office had emptied and she was the last one at her desk and the city outside the floor-to-ceiling windows was doing its warm evening version of itself. On those evenings, the discipline required a little more effort. She was good at discipline. She had been good at it since she was 19 years old and had decided that the only answer to being told you did not belong somewhere was to build the kind of life that made the question irrelevant. She had built it. She had not built it quickly or easily or without cost. But she had built it. What she had not entirely anticipated was that the building had not answered every question. It had answered the professional ones. She was not, by any measurable standard, dismissible. But the other ones, the ones that operated at a different level from professional ambition, those had simply been deferred while she worked. And deferred things had a way of becoming visible when you ran out of new things to build toward. She was not sure she had run out of new things to build. She was fairly sure she had not been thinking this clearly about it before Daniel Ashford walked into conference room B. It was on a Tuesday in the 4th month, at a site visit to one of the development locations in the industrial corridor east of the city, that the arrangement shifted. The visit was routine. Nadia's project lead, a careful young woman named Sola, had organized it with the thoroughness that characterized everything she did. The site was a 40-minute drive from the city center, through the industrial corridor where the city's manufacturing history was visible in the old factory buildings that stood beside the newer logistics parks, the past and the present occupying the same street with the specific indifference that cities have about their own evolution. The purpose was to assess the infrastructure baseline before the development planning began. There were 6 people on the visit. Sola and 2 members of Nadia's team, Daniel and one of his analysts, and a local engineer from the government liaison office. They walked the site for 3 hours in hard hats and high-vis jackets, the kind of visit where the logistics of the physical space require a different kind of attention from the usual meeting room focus. Nadia had always liked site visits. There was something clarifying about seeing the actual ground on which a project was going to stand. The soil, the sight lines, the access roads, the things that did not appear in documents but that determined whether a project lived or failed. She was looking at the eastern boundary of the site, making a note about the drainage gradient, when Daniel came and stood beside her. The eastern drainage is going to be a problem if the development plan does not account for the rainy season runoff. I know. My analyst flagged it last week. I was going to raise it in the next technical meeting. Raise it in this one. She nodded toward Sola and the engineer 50 meters away. The engineer will know the historical runoff pattern. He wrote it down. Then he looked at her. You noticed that in 30 seconds. I spent 2 years doing infrastructure assessments before I moved to investment. You learned to read drainage. I did not know that. There is a great deal you do not know about the last 11 years. No weight in it. Simply true. He held her gaze. And vice versa. She looked back at the drainage gradient. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. Can I ask you something that is not about the deal? She kept her eyes on the site. You can ask. Do you ever think about what it would have been like if my mother had not done what she did? She thought about that. I used to. In the first few years. She paused. I stopped because it was not a useful question. What made it not useful? She looked at him. Because the answer was always yes, and the yes was always painful, and I was trying to build something. She looked back at the site. Useful questions were the only ones I had time for. He was quiet. What about you? I never stopped. She looked at the ground. They stood in silence. Around them the site was alive with the sounds of industrial land, distant machinery, wind across open space, the crunch of gravel underfoot. Daniel. Yes. We have 8 months left on this deal, and I need to be able to focus on closing it. I know. Whatever this is. I know. After the deal closes. He looked at her. She kept her eyes on the site. After the deal closes. They walked back toward the group. The remaining 8 months were both easier and harder than the first 4. Easier because the ground had been acknowledged. There was no longer the specific tension of something that was not being said. It was now something that was being held, which was different. There was a difference between a thing that was avoided and a thing that was deferred, and she found, to her own mild surprise, that the deferral was something she could carry without it affecting her work. Harder because carrying it took energy. And because Daniel Ashford, it turned out, was genuinely excellent at his work in ways that she found herself noticing in spite of herself. He thought about problems the way she thought about problems, from the structure outward rather than from the surface in. He asked the questions that mattered. He managed his team with the same directness she used with hers, without making it feel like pressure. She found herself looking forward to the meetings where they were both in the room, which she noted and found professionally inconvenient. There were 3 moments in those 8 months that she would remember clearly afterward. The first was a late evening in month 6, when the regulatory approval in the second jurisdiction had stalled and Nadia had stayed in the office until 9 trying to work out a path around the blockage. She had been there for 3 hours past her normal schedule, and the building was mostly empty, and she had ordered food to her desk and was working through the regulatory framework document for the 4th time when a knock came at her office glass. Daniel was standing in the corridor with 2 cups of coffee from the place on the ground floor. She had looked at him. She had looked at the coffee. Felix told me you were still here. Felix had gone home hours ago. He had clearly passed this on at some point earlier in the evening. You were here until 9? Working on the same problem from our side. He held up a cup. May I? She gestured at the chair across from her desk. He sat. He set the coffee in front of her and looked at the regulatory document on her screen. I think the path is through the environmental clause in Article 14. I have been looking at Article 14 for 40 minutes. Not subclause 14.3, the parent clause. He leaned forward slightly. The environmental impact threshold is calibrated to a different land classification system than the one the development is being assessed under. If we reclassify through the Infrastructure Development Ordinance, the threshold changes. She looked at her screen. She read Article 14. She read it again. That is right. I know. How long have you known? About 20 minutes. He looked at her steadily. I came straight here. She held that for a moment. Thank you. We are on the same deal. I know. She paused. Thank you anyway. They worked together for another 2 hours until 11, side by side at her desk with the regulatory documents between them, finding the path. The building was empty around them. The city outside was doing its late-night work. When they finally closed the laptops, the blockage had been resolved. Not perfectly, there would be more to do in the morning, but the shape of the solution was clear. He stood to go. He put on his jacket. Nadia. She was stacking papers. She looked up. I came back to this city because of the deal. That is true. He looked at her directly. It is not the only reason I stayed. She looked at him for a moment. Good night, Daniel. Good night. He left. She sat at her desk for a while after he went. The city outside was quieter. The floor-to-ceiling windows reflected her own office back at her, and in the reflection she could see the chair where he had been sitting, now empty. She thought about 11 years and what you chose to do with them. The second moment was at a dinner in month 8. It was a working dinner, 6 people, a private room at a restaurant near the business district, the kind of dinner that was technically social but functionally operational, where the plates were good and the conversation was about the deal. Gerald Anker was there and 2 of his board members, and Nadia had brought her division's head of legal, and Daniel was there representing the Anker partnership side. The dinner went well. The deal was in its final stages and everyone at the table knew it, and there was the specific warmth of a room where people had worked hard toward something and could see it nearly finished. At the end of the dinner, when the others had gone and only Nadia and Daniel remained at the table with the last of the wine, Gerald Anker came back through the room. He had forgotten his phone and stopped when he saw them. You 2 went to school together, didn't you? Someone mentioned it. The same city growing up. Different schools. Gerald nodded. It shows. You work together like people who understand each other. He picked up his phone and left. She and Daniel were quiet for a moment. Different schools. Technically true. She looked at the wine. They had gone to the same school for 2 years. The overlap when his family had moved to the neighborhood where her mother's shop was. The 2 years that contained everything. Daniel. Yes. The deal closes in 6 weeks. He looked at her. After the deal closes. Yes. I need you to understand something first. He waited. What your mother did, what she said to me. I want you to understand what it was. Not so that you carry it as a debt. She looked at the table. But so that you understand why it took me this long to be in the same room as you without needing to be very careful. Tell me. She offered me tea. I remember that. She was very warm about it, the kind of warmth that is a form of control. She asked about my mother's business, how long she had been in the same location, whether business was good. She asked the way someone asks about a thing they already know the answer to. She looked at the wine glass. Then she told me I was charming for a girl from the market. Said it with a smile. Said your family had certain expectations and she was sure I understood. She chose the last word carefully. I still remember the word. She said I was delightful. She paused. But he was very still. I was 19 years old and I had never been told so precisely that I was a type of thing and not a person. She kept her voice level. I had known we came from different places. I had not known until that moment that where I came from was considered a disqualification. Nadia, I am not telling you this so you can apologize for her. She looked at him. I am telling you because you asked once if I thought about what it might have been like. The honest answer is that question is not the useful one. The useful question is whether what we are now can carry what happened then without being defined by it. He was quiet for a long moment. Can it? I think so. She paused. I would not have stayed in the same professional relationship for 12 months if I did not think so. He looked at her. That is the most analytical way anyone has ever almost told me they still have feelings for me. She looked at him. He almost smiled. I am a very analytical person. I know. He looked at the table. I always liked that about you. I liked a great many things about you too. Past tense? She held his gaze. Working on it. He exhaled. Something in him settled, the specific settling of a person who has been holding something for a long time and has just been given permission to put it down. 6 weeks. 6 weeks. The third moment was 4 days before the deal closed. She had been in back-to-back meetings since 7 in the morning and it was now past 6 in the evening and the deal was essentially done. The final documents were in review, the regulatory approvals were in place, the capital had been committed. The last 4 days were administrative, the kind of final sprint that was more endurance than intelligence. She was tired in the specific way of someone who had been running at high capacity for a very long time and could see the finish line. She was in the lobby of her building, waiting for her car, when he came through the entrance doors. He had clearly just come from somewhere. His jacket was over his arm, his tie was loosened, and he had the look of someone who had also been running at high capacity since 7 in the morning. He saw her. "You are going the wrong way." "I know." He crossed toward her. "I came to find you." She looked at him. The lobby was busy with end-of-day traffic. People moving in both directions, the specific rush of a city at 6 in the evening. "I have been thinking about what you said. About the useful question." She waited. "I want to ask a different one. Not the useful one. The real one." "What is the real one? Are you happy?" She looked at him. "Not with the deal. Not with the division. Not professionally." He held her gaze. "Just, are you happy?" She looked at the lobby floor. She thought about her apartment with the good light. She thought about her mother who called every Sunday and had been prouder of Nadia's career than Nadia had sometimes known how to accept. She thought about what she had built and whether the thing that was missing from it had a shape she could name. "I have been building toward happy for 11 years. She looked at him. "I think I am almost there." "What is the last piece?" She looked at him for a long moment. "I think you know what the last piece is." He stepped slightly closer. Not dramatically, one step. The lobby continued around them. "The deal closes on Friday." "Yes." "Have dinner with me on Saturday." She looked at him. "Dinner. Dinner. At a restaurant. Where we are not talking about a deal. What will we talk about?" 11 years. And what comes after them. The lobby moved around them. "Yes." His car came. He nodded once, the specific nod of someone who has just been given something they have been waiting a long time for and are trying to be measured about it. He went through the door. Her own car pulled up a moment later. She got in. She sat back against the seat and looked at the city moving past the window. She had been building towards something for 11 years. She thought she could see it now. The deal closed on Friday as scheduled. The signing was at Gerald Anker's offices, a large conference room with too many people in it, the specific energy of a transaction completing, hands shaken, documents signed, photographs taken because Gerald always wanted photographs. Nadia signed on behalf of Meridian's West Africa division and shook Gerald's hand and accepted the congratulations of the room with the warmth she felt and the composure she had practiced. Daniel was across the table. When she signed and looked up, he was looking at her. He did not smile. It was not a smiling moment, it was a professional room, but something was in his expression that was better than a smile. She looked back at Gerald. She went back to her office and told her team they had done exceptional work, which they had, and sent Felix home early, which he deserved. She sat at her desk for a while looking at the city. She thought, done. Saturday came. The restaurant he had chosen was not the kind of place that was trying to impress anyone. It was the kind of place that was simply very good, quiet, specific, the food the reason and not the occasion. She had not been here before and she found, arriving, that she liked it immediately. He was already there. He stood when she came in. She sat across from him and they looked at each other across the small table and neither of them said anything for a moment because everything that needed to be said required a different kind of language from the one they had been using for 12 months. "Tell me about London. Tell me about the management consulting scar. How do you know about that?" "I read about your consulting years in a business journal profile. 3 years ago." He looked at the table. "I read everything you were quoted in for about 4 years before I told myself to stop." She was very still. "I did not tell myself to stop." She said it quietly. "I read everything I could find about you too." He looked at her. "You built a very good logistics company. You built a very good division. We built very good things separately. Yes. I think we can build something better together." "I think so too." She picked up her menu. He picked up his. They had dinner for 3 hours. The food was very good and neither of them paid much attention to it, which was its own kind of compliment to the conversation. She told him about the consulting firm, the partner who had pushed her hardest and the way she had initially resented it and then understood it. The 2 years she had spent at 30,000 feet, moving between cities and boardrooms and documents that described infrastructure that she had never seen with her eyes, only with numbers, and the way that had eventually become unsustainable and led her to Meridian and to the division and to the work that connected the numbers to the actual ground. He told her about the logistics company, how it had started as a necessity, something he had built because the problem was there and nobody else was solving it, and how it had grown past the point where it needed only him, and he had found himself, for the first time in his professional life, with the specific space of not being needed every minute. He had sold his stake and gone to London. He had spent 4 years in London understanding capital markets from the inside, which was a different education from the one he had received in business school, and which had eventually brought him to Anchor Holdings and to the city and to a conference room where a woman he had spent 11 years thinking about was sitting at the head of the table. "You thought about me for 11 years? I told you I did. You told me you read the articles for 4 years. The articles were the part one told you about. They talked about London and the management consulting scar and the logistics company and the deal and his mother and her mother and the tailoring shop and what the city had been like before both of them left it and what it was like now that both of them were back. They talked the way people talk when they have been waiting to have a conversation for a very long time, and the conversation, now that it is finally possible, turns out to be even better than they remembered. At the end of the dinner, walking out of the restaurant into the night air, the city doing its usual work around them, he stopped. "Can I ask you something?" "You can ask." "The first morning of the deal, when you walked into conference room B and saw me." He looked at her. "What did you actually feel?" She thought about it. "I felt 11 years collapse into nothing." He was quiet. And then the very strong professional instinct to make sure that did not show. It did not show. "Good. I knew anyway." She looked at him. "How? You called me Daniel Ashford. My full name." He almost smiled. People only do that when they are trying to control a situation. She looked at the street. "That is very observant of you. I have been paying attention to you since we were 17 years old. Simply, without performance. That does not turn off." She looked at him for a long moment. "Walk me to my car." He walked her to her car. At the car, she turned to face him. "I want to say something that I have been practicing for 11 years. He waited. "I am glad you tried to reach me, even when I did not answer." She looked at him directly. "I knew you tried, and it mattered even when I was not ready to let it matter." He was quiet for a moment. "I have regretted every day that I did not try harder." You did not know what she had said. "I should have known." His jaw tightened slightly. "I should have asked you why you did not answer, and I should have asked harder." "Yes. I am sorry." She looked at him for a long moment. "I know." She got in the car and lowered the window. "Saturday was a good idea. I have more of them." "I know." She looked at him. "See you Monday." "Monday." She raised the window. She sat in the back of the car for a moment, and then she did something she had not planned to do. She called her mother. Her mother answered on the second ring, the way she always did, because she kept her phone on the counter of the tailoring shop and picked it up the moment it rang unless she had a needle in her hand. "Nadia, it is late on a Saturday." "I know. Are you still in the shop?" "I am always in the shop." "What has happened?" "Nothing bad." She looked out at the city passing. "Mama, do you remember Daniel Ashford?" A pause. The sound of her mother setting something down. "The boy from the corner house. His family moved away." "Yes. He has been back in the city for 8 months. He was working on the deal I just closed." Her mother was quiet. A beat. "And? We had dinner tonight." "How was the dinner?" "Very good." "And the boy?" She looked at the city. "He is not a boy anymore." Her mother made a sound that contained approximately 40 years of understanding how the world worked. "No, I do not suppose he is." A pause. "Are you all right?" "Yes. I think I might be more than all right." "Good. Come and see me on Sunday. Bring something to eat. I have been in this shop all week and I want to hear the whole story. I will come on Sunday." "And Nadia?" "Yes. You always belonged exactly where you are. Whatever anyone ever told you to the contrary." She held the phone. "I know, Mama." "Good. Now go home and sleep. You sound like you have been working since 7 in the morning." "I have." "Sunday. Bring food." Her mother ended the call. She sat in the back of the car and looked out at the city moving past. She had been building towards something for 11 years. A career, a life, a version of herself that could not be dismissed by a word like but. She thought about 11 years and what they had cost and what they had made. She thought about a man who had read everything she had been quoted in for 4 years before he told himself to stop. She thought about Saturday and Monday and what came after Monday. She looked at the city. She had been building toward something. She thought she had arrived.